What's up, YouTube? It's the one and only Legend of Winning, aka Low, and I am back with another video. Now, for people out there who've been following the NBA all throughout the offseason, we are all aware of all the moves and transactions that has happened between players and teams. And honestly, you can make a very legitimate argument that the offseason has been more exciting and has more memorable moments than the regular season itself. However, we're not going to really get too much into it. But there is one thing that we are going to talk about, and it is something that I believe a lot of people are concerned about the NBA moving forward, and that is the talent gap that is between the Western Conference and the Eastern Conference. Now, we are all aware that there was somewhat of a talent gap between both of the conference over the last several seasons. However, this offseason, it has grown so much that it is ridiculous. Now, outside of Gordon Hayward, who made a transition from Utah to Boston, all the other great players that were speculated to make a transition to another organization, they either stayed in the Western Conference or they made a transition to the West from the Eastern Conference, regardless if it was through trade or signing to another organization. Now, with all these transactions and moves that have happened, this has really left the Eastern Conference lacking a lot of talent moving forward, and it does give me a big concern when it comes to the NBA and what exactly could be on the horizon. Which leads me to the question that I have to ask. Why exactly do we still have conferences? To me, conferences seem a bit out of date because we have far surpassed whatever excuses there are to have conferences in the NBA. Multiple people claim that the reason why we have conferences is due to rivalries. Now, I somewhat agree. You have to face certain players consistently through the playoffs to build a rivalry, and that can be easier done when you have conferences. Now, even though that's easier said than done, the Eastern Conference still has a hard time doing that. Because even though, yes, there are solid players in the Eastern Conference, the teams themselves are not consistent enough to always make the playoffs, so they can always face up against other Eastern Conference teams and build that rivalry. And on top of that, the biggest rivalry that's going on right now is the Golden State Warriors and the Cleveland Cavaliers, two teams that are not in the conference with one another. Very similar to one of the biggest rivalries in all of sports, which is the Boston Celtics up against the Los Angeles Lakers. Again, two teams that are not in the same conference with one another. The next excuse I hear a lot of times is scheduling. If you have conferences, it's easier to make your schedule, which I somewhat agree with. However, it's not impossible to make a schedule without conferences. All you have to do is have one team face 24 teams 3 times throughout the entire season, and the remaining 5 teams just face them twice. The reason why you would want to do this is because, one, Eastern Conference teams have a much easier schedule compared to their Western Conference counterparts. So if we really want to make this fair and even for everyone, this right here would actually level out the playing field for both conferences, so we can actually get a respectable record from every team. And not only would the standings in the NBA be much more respectable, but also it would be much easier to compare one team to another, regardless of what conference they play in. And then I also hear this argument that the reason why we have conferences is due to traveling. Now, if we lived in 1977, I would somewhat agree with you. However, in 2017, the technology that we possess is far greater than the basic exploration that every NBA team has to go through on a year-to-year basis. So I really don't understand that either. And even if we want to talk about traveling time, the Western Conference is still left at a massive disadvantage. When you look at the Eastern Conference, the biggest gap in flight distance is between the Boston Celtics and the Miami Heat, which is roughly around 1,250 miles. However, compare that to the most frequently traveled distance in the Western Conference teams. You have 4 teams in California, 3 teams in Texas, which is nearly half of the conference alone, and yet the distance that they have to travel amongst one another is still larger than the longest distance that has to be traveled in the Eastern Conference. So even though, yes, traveling may be a bit of a problem, I really don't believe it's so much of a problem that we should consistently overlook one of the biggest problems in the NBA. And the reason why I do believe that this is a big problem in the NBA right now is for 2 reasons. One, you have a massive disadvantage when it comes to the Western Conference. Like I just showed you, not only did the Western Conference face a massive disadvantage when it comes to traveling time, difficulty in schedule, but also you have certain players and organizations that do not receive the right type of recognition or the accolades and achievements, not because they're not talented enough, but simply because they play in the Western Conference. For example, take a player such as Damian Lillard, one of my favorite players, so I'm going to be a little bit biased here. However, Damian Lillard posts up the numbers, I'm pretty sure we all know. He posts up the numbers that should put him in the All-Star game. However, he's not going to be in the All-Star game simply because he plays in the Western Conference. Now, I'm not trying to bash Kemba Walker, but I do believe it's a fair comparison. Look at the numbers that Kemba Walker has possessed last year, and even look at the team's success itself. There's no rhyme or reason why Kemba Walker should have been listed as an All-Star last year, but Damian Lillard wasn't, outside of the fact that they both play in 2 different conferences, and it's much easier to be an all-star in the East than it is in the West. And even with all of those advantages that the Eastern Conference has had over the last several years, it's still extremely hard for the Eastern Conference to produce quality talent, regardless if it's players or teams. So why exactly should we harm or hinder some legacies and careers, or even organizations that's in the Western Conference, if they're making the right decisions? Damian Lillard should not go through his career having less all-star appearances than a player such as Kemba Walker, even though I'm pretty sure we all agree that Damian Lillard is a better player. And there's a possibility that Damian Lillard, and I hope that this doesn't happen, but there is a possibility that Damian Lillard won't receive the right accolades, recognition, achievements to put him in the Hall of Fame, even though statistically he's putting up Hall of Fame numbers. So if we got rid of conferences and we still want to do the all-star selections, all we have to do is allow the fans to select their 10 players that they want to do in fan voting, and then just let the coaches vote on the rest of the team. And then after that, the 2 players who have the highest fan votes, let them be team captains and just pick teams reset style. I believe that's a better system. I think it'll be more easier to watch and more exciting, but more importantly, I do believe it's much more fair, especially to a lot of Western Conference players and organizations who quite honestly have a hard time receiving the type of recognition that they rightfully deserve, even though they're posting up the numbers that easily should give them those type of accolades. However, the bigger problem is, it seems as if the Eastern Conference is way too dependent on LeBron James. We're now at a point where LeBron, he's not going to be in the NBA for another 10 to 15 years. He more likely will be on the decline of his career. And not to say that that's going to change anything, and not to say that he's not going to be an all-star or even one of the better players in the NBA. However, moving forward, there has to be a massive concern for the NBA. See, the Eastern Conference right now, especially when it comes to the finals and who gets the finals appearances and how the ratings work, it seems as if LeBron wasn't in the Eastern Conference, and if LeBron wasn't making the playoffs, and if he wasn't making the finals every single year, it definitely will hurt the NBA in multiple ways. Now, I'm not saying that they're going to produce someone like LeBron every 10 to 15 years, and I'm also not saying that there's no talent in the Eastern Conference whatsoever. However, look at the Western Conference, for example. 10 years ago, you had teams such as the Los Angeles Lakers, led by Kobe Bryant, the San Antonio Spurs, led by Tim Duncan, and then you had the Dallas Mavericks, led by Dirk Nowitzki, along with a lot of other teams such as the Phoenix Suns, led by Steve Nash, and so on and so forth. And here we are now, where we make the transition to teams such as the Golden State Warriors, the Minnesota Timberwolves with Karl-Anthony Towns, Wiggins, and now Jimmy Butler. Then you have OKC with Russell Westbrook and Paul George, Houston Rockets with James Harden and Chris Paul, and so on and so forth. However, transition to the Eastern Conference, again, not saying that it's going to happen anytime soon, but the day that it does come, because I do believe it's going to come sooner than later, LeBron retiring, or he may not be on a relevant team, especially because Kyrie is now demanding a trade, it does leave a significant problem. Sure, you have teams such as the Washington Wizards with Bradley Beal and John Wall, but I love John Wall myself, but let's be honest, that's not really a title contending team. And then you have teams such as the Milwaukee Bucks and the Philadelphia 76ers. Again, very, very solid. I love Giannis. I think that what's going on in Philadelphia is very interesting. However, let's not overlook the injuries. Jabari Parker and Embiid are suffering injuries that definitely could derail whatever's happening in those organizations. And then we have the Boston Celtics. Great organization. Seems like they got a lot of things going on for themselves, but they don't even have a top 10, 15, and some people would even argue not even a top 20 player on their roster. So even though, yes, you may be the best team in the Eastern Conference, what exactly does that mean moving forward? And that's actually where I want to end this video. If you are Adam Silver or any decision maker for the NBA, you have to be forward thinking and understanding that there's a possibility that LeBron could be leaving the Eastern Conference, or even if he doesn't, sooner than later he's going to retire. And when that day comes, what are you going to be able to produce coming out of the East? Because if it's a whole bunch of teams that are really good, solid players, however, there's no real massive star power, there's no real massive appeal to why anybody would want to watch those teams, I do believe there's going to be a massive problem moving forward, especially when you start to realize the direction that the Western Conference is going in, and has consistently been going in over the last several years. And with all that being said, people, let me know what you think about the video in the comment section below. Hit the thumbs up if you enjoyed it. Make sure you hit the subscribe button to be updated on all the greatest NBA content in the community. And also make sure you follow me on Twitter, because I have been extremely active over the last several days. But with all that being said, I'll see you all later. Peace.